And pleased to welcome all of you to our Open Caucus. I'm Art Eggleton, Senator from Toronto, co-chair of the caucus, and along with Claudette Tardif, Senator from Alberta. This Open Caucus initiative, we open our doors to Canadians, parliamentarians, and to the media. We want to learn about and discuss issues of national importance. This effort is hosted by the Senate Independent Liberal Caucus, but is intended to be non-partisan, and we have had members from other groups here from time to time because we welcome and encourage a variety of opinions during these discussions. Today, we're going to move into part two of our discussions on robotics and artificial intelligence, and this one specifically dealing with military applications. New classes of robotics can be cost-effective, reduce payloads, and minimize harm to soldiers. From exoskeletons to human-operated unmanned vehicles, current advancements require that humans are kept in the loop with regards to decision-making. However, at least 6 countries are working on the full integration of artificial intelligence into military technologies, thereby potentially increasing the use of autonomous weapons on the battlefield. Although an open letter arguing for a ban on fully autonomous weapons has been signed by 3,100 robotics and AI researchers, there has been no international agreement regarding what level of human control there should be in these cases. To address this important topic, we will discuss the range of legal, ethical, and strategic challenges that are posed by technological advancements as they apply to military operations. Now, on the logistics side, there's coffee in the back for anybody who wants it. Translation devices are on our table. And for those at the back, what channel is English and what channel is French? 12? 12 and 13. Up on the table, it's 1 and 2. And we encourage those in the audience to participate. Agnes, over here, raise your hand. Thank you. If you give her your name and where you're from or what institution or company, whatever you want to say about what you represent, and she'll get it up to me and we'll weave it in with the in the course of the meeting. So there are 2 microphones, number 6 and number 29. From this end, they have those numbers. And up to 3 minutes for questions or comments from people in the audience. So with that, my co-chair, Senator Tardif.
Merci. Alors bonjour, bon matin. Il me fait également.
Thank you. Good morning. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this meeting of the Open Caucus. And I'd also like to thank our speakers for having accepted to come speak to us this morning. Today we'll be speaking about robotics and artificial intelligence, in particular the military applications of these technologies. The evolution of military technologies leads to multiple challenges and opportunities. At least 6 countries are working on the full integration of AI into military technologies, thereby potentially increasing the use of autonomous weapons in the battlefield. There is no international agreement regarding what level of human control there should be on the battlefield. To address this important topic, we will discuss the range of legal, ethical, and strategic challenges that are posed by technological advancements as they apply to military operations. Without further ado, I will now invite our speakers to take the floor.
People quite knowledgeable in these areas that will speak to us today. We're missing one at the moment. We hope they'll be able to arrive soon. But first of all, let's start with Jeremy Littlewood, who is an assistant professor at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. Prior to joining the school in 2007, he worked at the University of Southampton and served as advisor under secondment to the Counter-Proliferation Department in the United Kingdom Foreign and Commonwealth Office, as associate officer at the United Nations Department for Disarmament Affairs also, and with the forces of the UK. holds a PhD and a BA from Department of Peace Studies, University of Bradford in the UK. And at the Norman Paterson School, he leads the Intelligence and International Affairs field of the master's program. Professor Littlewood.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chair, members of the Open Caucus. Let me thank you for the invitation to speak here today on the military implications of robotics and artificial intelligence. It is an honor to do so. To contribute to this discussion, I want to focus on the military applications as they relate to lethal autonomous weapons and offer a perspective to you that's drawn from experience of other international arms control and disarmament agreements. An arms control or disarmament approach to lethal autonomous weapons, or a ban agreement on such weapons, is intuitively appealing. However, it is far from simple in practice. Moreover, if a ban agreement is to be modeled on traditional arms control agreements, it is essential to think about the actual operation of such an agreement in practice over time. And this will entail thinking through implementation difficulties, compliance challenges, and detection, investigation, and enforcement of violations of any agreement, rather than simply focusing on negotiation tactics to achieve the agreement per se. Now, concerns about lethal autonomous weapons, or killer robots, as the advocates for a ban agreement refer to them, are, to use the words of one of the supporters of a laws ban treaty, based on speculative, futuristic, and fictional scenarios, given that even lethal autonomous weapons with humans either in or on the loop are very narrowly deployed at this stage. Proponents of a ban treaty consider this non-deployment to be a central rationale for the agreement. This preemptive control is in fact arguably easier when such weapons have not yet been developed or proliferated or are in the arsenals of many more actors. However, before this model of arms control is adopted, consideration of whether or not it's appropriate and how such agreements like it have worked in practice is necessary. 5 ban treaties are often cited as examples for a future prohibition on lethal autonomous weapons. These are the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention of 1972, the Chemical Weapons Convention of 1993, Protocol 4 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons related to blinding lasers of 1995, the Mine Ban Treaty of 1997, and the Convention on Cluster Munitions of 2008. While each of these does indeed have a degree of salience to the issue of lethal autonomous weapons, 2, I think, are more appropriate models. These are related to biological and chemical weapons. They're more appropriate models for AI and robotics because the conventions dealing with chemical and biological weapons deal with dual-use goods, materials, and knowledge, and they prohibit purposes rather than easily defined things. For example, botulinum toxin can be administered to patients to control muscle spasms, but is clearly prohibited from being used as a weapon or placed in bombs or missiles. Similarly, chlorine can be used legitimately for a number of reasons, including as a disinfectant or helping to make drinking water safe, but its use as a weapon is clearly prohibited. Neither chlorine nor botulinum toxin are prohibited per se, but their use is limited to certain purposes. In contrast to this, the Mine Ban Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions deal with tangible and physical things which are defined as part of the agreement. Now, this level of specifics and these issues of single design characteristics will not be the case in lethal autonomous weapons. It's similarly not the case in either biological or chemical weapons. And definitional issues such as what is autonomy, what is a weapon, and the related issues such as meaningful human control or notions of humans in the loop, out of the loop, or on the loop are crucial to effective implementation of any future agreement. Distinctions between autonomous and non-autonomous may simply be related to either software code or simple decisions or non-decision procedures depending on the operation in question. Now, all of these issues are in fact relatively well known. The campaign to stop killer robots has as its principal aim to prohibit taking humans out of the loop with respect to targeting and attack decisions. But as this Open Caucus has already heard, AI and robotics have multiple uses in a wide variety of areas. We are not dealing with a technology or a platform or knowledge or materials and goods that are solely in the control of state actors, nor solely related to military issues. Indeed, much of each of these issues are outside state control and in the hands of many different kinds of actors in a wide array of countries. Regulating AI and robotics is more likely to resemble multi-level governance structures that involve hard law, soft law, and informal activities. We shouldn't forget equally that governments are bound by Article 36 of the First Additional Protocol to the Geneva Conventions, which requires a review of new weapons in terms of their compliance with existing international humanitarian law and the laws of armed conflicts. In that sense, then, I think the Open Caucus needs to think and consider a number of issues related to any ban on autonomous weapons, including the fact that the technology, materials, goods, and knowledge are dual use. The military dimensions of AI and robotics are a subset of civilian dimensions, and the dividing lines between them are not at all simple. Use in military operations will evolve over time. It will include peacekeeping, search and rescue, humanitarian and disaster relief, as well as combat operations. And such systems may have the capability to deal with all kinds of scenarios, and their autonomy, as well as their lethality, may be variable and changeable depending on the operational environment they're deployed in. We should recognize that preemptive weapon bans do not always succeed. While we have a relatively good historical set of literature and examples to draw from, such as expanding bullets, succeeded, efforts to prevent submarine warfare and aerial bombing of cities both failed. Compliance with any future agreement will equally not be simple. Writing into law, and particularly international law, technological limitations that will be difficult to amend and revise in 5 or 10 years' time risks an agreement that will ossify and be bypassed or circumvented over time. And we should certainly recognize that investigating any future alleged violations of any agreement is unlikely to produce simple answers or findings that will be accepted by states, as is our current experience with chemical weapons at this point in time. So I think a most likely scenario at this stage is the establishment of a set of principles that are required by law and the existing requirements by law to undertake reviews of new weapons systems as they come online. To be clear for the Open Caucus, I am largely sympathetic to the issues and points raised in support of a lethal autonomous weapons system ban treaty, as articulated by the coalition in making the case. But I'm also very wary of approaches that focus on a treaty without giving detailed consideration to its implementation and operation over time. An evolutionary approach that develops normative understandings and constraints, involves code of conducts as well as national or regional approaches, may turn out to be more adaptive, resilient, and acceptable means to ensure control of future lethal autonomous weapons. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Merci, merci beaucoup, Mr. Littlewood. Thank you very much for starting us off. Our next speaker, Monsieur Ian Glenn, qui est chef de la direction, dirigeant.
The Chief Executive Officer and Chief Technology Officer and owner of ING Robotic Aviation, Inc. Over the past 15 years, under Mr. Glenn's leadership, ING has integrated and invented robust unmanned aerial vehicle systems and provided services across the globe in harsh conditions. As a pioneer of industrial drones, Mr. Glenn has created new markets and capabilities, introducing UAVs to various sectors, including natural resources, agriculture, forestry, utility, construction, defense, and public safety. Ian and his company have been recognized with international and national awards. He is also a member of the Aviation Advisory Group for Global Affairs Canada. Welcome.
An honor to be here this morning to speak to this topic. The challenge is always, as an industrialist and entrepreneur, to find yourself engaged in what is really, as Dr. Littlewood pointed out, we're at the forefront of so much innovation, so much change, right? And it does come down to how we as a nation want to look at these evolving technologies, and actually, do we have an opportunity to influence them? I operate very much at the coalface, right? I build industrial drones. My background is that of a Cold Warrior. So my first job out of university was, from the Royal Military College, was to command troops in Europe. So I have a distinct appreciation, perhaps not shared by many, of what that means when Canada says we're going to operate a certain way. That's informed by many years of going to school. I tell my daughter I did grade 22. So I've done both signal processing through to mechanical and computer engineering. And I find myself in this space today leading innovation, which is moving much, much faster than governments can predict. And Jeremy raised some great points about how we need to think about, even if we can control this. So just to illustrate a little bit more of where the world is today, it was my team that flew the technology for the Army that put these, what I like to call, unseen angels over the battle space, right? So over our troops in Afghanistan, we flew over 30,000 hours from 2008 to 2011, helping to keep our troops safe. How did we do that? Not by they were not weaponized, but they allowed them to go and see what was in front of them, help looking for essentially bad people doing bad things. We did the same thing for the Navy from 2011 and 2014, where the mission was in the Indian Ocean, looking for folks that we didn't, who were in the drug trade or piracy, as part of a NATO commitment. Again, these little robots flying over in the middle of the night could see the folks that were under the rules that we were operating, not allowed to do things. So the technology piece works from can we go and fly robots in these harsh conditions that have a direct military bearing. And so what we do today is we actually build a number of different systems. We do a helicopter, which is flying right now for the UN in the Congo, helping to map out areas for humanitarian relief. We have a fixed-wing aircraft. I just put some pictures up there, where it'll fly for 8 hours, and it's being used next month, actually, with the Bermuda government as part of a security. And we have a longer endurance aircraft that'll fly for over 24 hours. So the technology piece comes, and this is all, when we talk about dual use, this is all really, it might be helping with humanitarian, it might be floods, it might be food security. So we're not in a world where it's all military. If we look at the state of play for drones in the military, we're all familiar now, and there's some great films about this, about the spy drones and killer drones. That used to be the only way it was. Well, the world has changed. In Canada, there are 200,000 commercial drones in operation. And so we see these things that used to be big are now smaller and smaller and smaller. But in the military context, because you've got these little quadcopters that are cheap and available, ISIL has now adopted them to fly over and drop hand grenades on troops. So the battle space changed. I mean, a soldier's job used to worry about, as you were moving through an area, I have to worry about the guy on the ground and perhaps a sniper up there. Now there's this other dimension. So now if we bring in so that's the technically, can we go and do stuff? We can go, people are doing stuff all the time now, and it's not the military, it's pervasive technology around the world. So if we think about artificial intelligence and robotics, so the platforms exist, but we live in a confluence of technologies. So the same thing that Google and all of the automakers are now pursuing in terms of autonomous cars that have the ability to act when little Johnny runs up between the cars, right? You take that, and that applies now into the third dimension. Well, that's a good thing when you think of it for safe use of the airspace. So now robots can fly through the airspace and be safer than manned aviation. And we think about level of automation today in manned aviation. The average pilot in our aviation only touches the controls for about 7 minutes of the flight. The rest of it is all automatic, right? So where we're going on the commercial side is this idea of push a button, go survey the crops, go look for lost kids. All of the things that we want help with, the aviation component can now be done by a robot. That's a fascinating world. The challenge is when we think about weaponization. So, we talk about human on the loop, in the loop. I mean, where we don't want to be, personal opinion, is we don't want the HAL 9000, right? I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. So between the ethicists, the philosophy, and the engineering, we have to find a way that brings that together so that we maintain some level of at least understanding what the robot's behavior is going to be. We want it to be deterministic. That's sort of the world where we're moving into. And I would say in many cases we're there, we just haven't necessarily, all the dots haven't been connected. But this is not a next decade problem. This is an immediate problem. We already have authority to fly or to drive cars autonomously in Canada, right? So we have to think through these issues, and whether it's electronic warfare, or cyber peace, where robots play, or the delivery of ordnance. And we have this idea of fire and forget. As a military, or as a veteran and a former military, this ability to, I know this is a bad guy, I've gone through all of the rules that my country has given me, and I'm going to strike that individual with precision. That's not a bad thing, because that's what militaries do. How we frame it and what controls we can possibly put around it is the real question. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You raised a question right at the end, which we need to get some further dialogue on.
Good. Well, thank you for that very fascinating presentation. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions following up. Notre prochain conférencier, c'est Monsieur Jason Millar, titulaire de la bourse de recherche.
Jason Millar, postdoctoral research fellow in the law faculty of the University of Ottawa. His area of focus is design, ethics, and governance of robotics and artificial intelligence. He teaches on the ethics and governance of robotics and AI. He is currently researching various ethics and governance issues in the design of robotics and AI. He is developing philosophically grounded frameworks for use in ethically evaluating robotics and AI technologies in design and policy contexts. Previously, he worked as an engineer, designing aerospace electronics, manufacturing processes, and telecommunications hardware. Welcome, Mr. Millar.
Senator Eggleton, for inviting me to contribute to today's meeting. I'd like to commend him for his broad initiative, on robotics and artificial intelligence. Though the Canadian government finds itself lagging somewhat behind other countries in its research on robotics and AI, including the social and legal issues those new technologies will raise, all is not lost. In the meantime, many of us in academia and industry and even in government, we've been researching these important topics with the expectation that the government would soon come on board, and here we are. It's a good timing for that. Let me start by telling a short personal story about donuts of a sort, ethics, and engineering. It's so Canadian, I know. Early in my engineering career, I was in charge of an assembly line that manufactured electronics for civil, military, and space applications. most of my time was spent looking at rectangular circuit boards that would make their way into some aircraft or another. But one day, as I was looking through a box of parts that I needed to deal with, I noticed a very odd-looking assembly. Unlike its rectangular neighbors, this assembly resembled a donut. It was circular with a hole cut out in the middle. When I asked what it was, I was told it was part of a guided bomb unit, and the cutout in the middle was where the explosives went. And that day influenced me, and I think about it often in my work today. As a young engineer, it was the first time I realized the complicated connection between the things we build and the societies in which we deploy them. It was also the first time I realized that my engineering education had not prepared me well to investigate that link between technology and society. It turns out that most engineering programs don't, even today, unfortunately. So I've spent the last good part of the last 10 years researching that link, trying to understand how we ought to go about making decisions about technologies, given the significant impacts they can have on societies. So I was invited here today to speak about robotics and artificial intelligence in the military context. And I'd like to focus my comments on an ethical issue that has really dominated the policy conversations for the past several years. And that's the question that was raised already, whether or not we should be researching, developing, or deploying lethal autonomous weapons, and these are the so-called killer robots. I'd like to highlight a few key features of this ongoing public conversation, recognizing, of course, that it's a nuanced and complex debate that deserves a lengthier consideration. But first, let's get a bit clearer on the technology at the center of this debate, and I know we've had a little bit of description of that already. I'll add my 2 cents. So what are these lethal autonomous weapons? We tend to reserve that term, lethal autonomous weapon, for a robot that's capable of making the decision to use lethal force without direct human intervention. This is different from remotely controlled weapons, which are sort of standard and common today, which require a human to pull the trigger. And their ability to independently pull the trigger is why lethal autonomous weapons are often referred to as killer robots and not just drones or robots. The term killer robot might bring to mind Hollywood's Terminator, another Canadian invention, which unfortunately is somewhat unhelpful to the debate. We see this in the media. Current technology is nowhere near the sophistication of James Cameron's highly intelligent, human-like Terminator, which might lead some people to the very false conclusion that we have nothing to be concerned about today. The sobering fact is this: current technology allows us to design a military weapon system that could seek out, select, and fire on a target without any human intervention, if we so choose to design that system. Thus, whether or not we ought to do so is a pressing question, and it's given rise to an ongoing debate both at home but also at the United Nations, as Mr. Littlewood mentioned. So the debate looks something like this, generally speaking. On the one side, we have those opposing the development and use of lethal autonomous weapons for various reasons, while on the other side, we have proponents who come armed to the debate with their own set of justifications for pursuing the technology. What's interesting about the debate is that it's started to turn on the use of another important concept, and that's meaningful human control. It was mentioned in one of the earlier presentations. Now, at the international level, talk of meaningful human control is a key feature of the debate. Most countries have opted to take a position that stresses the importance of maintaining meaningful human control over autonomous weapon systems. But their positions differ based on definitions of the term, or on whether or not they believe meaningful human control must be maintained over the kill decision exclusively, or over more upstream decisions, such as whether or not to deploy the technology in a particular circumstance. But what's becoming clear is this: taking a position on the research, development, or use of lethal autonomous weapons will require one to simultaneously take some position on the role that meaningful human control plays in that debate. I was invited to give testimony on this issue at the UN in 2015. Unfortunately, at that meeting, the official Canadian position on the research, development, and use of lethal autonomous weapons was that Canada had no official position. The UN has since elevated the issue. It's no longer an informal process, and they will be holding formal meetings on the topic moving forward. So Canada must now, it seems, develop its official position in anticipation of that process. And I truly hope that officials will reach out to its many resident experts for consultation. I think this is an indication that that is beginning. So with that in mind, let me conclude by highlighting two areas of research that I've been involved in that I believe are important for supporting a Canadian policy position on autonomous weapons. The first involves my work with the Open Robotics Institute, and that's a think tank out of UBC. In late 2015, we published the results of our international public survey on the ethics and governance of lethal autonomous weapon systems. Because the legality of these proposed weapon systems is uncertain, international humanitarian law suggests public engagement as a legitimate means of informing the debate. In our study, a majority of participants indicated that lethal autonomous weapons should neither be developed nor used, and further stated a preference for the use of less autonomous, remotely operated weapons, the kinds that are being deployed today. And this is consistent with other surveys that have been conducted on this issue. Though we recognize that public surveys are not definitive on these issues when it comes to forming policy, we nonetheless argue that they play an important role both from a legal perspective, but also, and perhaps more importantly, from a public trust perspective. The second area of research involves an upcoming workshop that I'm organizing with Dr. Ian Kerr, who this caucus has heard from already at the first meeting, and it's funded through DRDC, Defense Engagement Program Initiative. The workshop will bring together a group of international experts and government stakeholders who will work together to develop a better understanding of meaningful human control and its relation to various policy options, all framed specifically in the Canadian context. Our goal is to generate a set of policy options based on the outcomes of that workshop. So finally, military robotics and AI pose complex ethical challenges, legal challenges, social challenges. And they make, I think, the guided bomb issue that I was dealing with as a young engineer seem kind of quaint by comparison. But we're well positioned to meet those challenges here in Canada. And I think it's time to take the work to the next level, and I appreciate the role that this process is playing in that effort. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much for all three of you for introducing us into the subject, and I think we're going to have quite a number of questions. And so let me get senators down on the list as you wish. Okay. And again, I'd remind those in the seats facing me that Agnes over here is willing to take your name down, and we'll work you into the conversation on this as well. So starting off, first question, Senator Mercer.
Thank you, Chair, and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'm a member of the Senate Standing Committee on Transportation Communications. We're in the middle of a study now on connected and automated vehicles at the request of the Minister of Transport. And I have to say that in all of our discussions so far, the military application has not crossed my mind. But now that we're here, you've raised the issue, and the question is how do we protect ourselves or prevent the use of automated vehicles as a carrier of car bombs, and they could be not only driverless, but they could be without anyone in them at all. So how do we do this?
Anybody want to tackle that?
Mr. Glenn?
So thank you very much. This is the challenge with pervasive technology. Whether it's cars or flying robots, the technology is pervasive. Millions of them flying, right? The ISIS example really illustrates that. How do you protect yourself? Well, there's a growing field on the aviation side of counter UAV, right? Where we try to detect and then act to counter someone who's flying a robot at us with the intent to do something we don't want them to do. It's very technologically challenging thing. But the more autonomous the vehicle is, the less it needs to depend on things outside itself, right, for navigation. So if it's using, GPS to navigate, well, we can jam GPS, but that affects us as well. But if it's smart enough to know where it is and it's got other ways to cue itself, it's going to act. So effectively, you can today build a car that can drive itself where we want it to go. The fact that it's packed with explosives is just ancillary to that. How do we counter cars that are smart enough to drive where they go, right? That is the challenge, and it's a non-trivial challenge. I don't have a pat answer for that, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. I think it's important to recognize in this context, when we're dealing with the kind of challenges you just raised, is to recognize that any security structure is going to be based on multiple layers. And so while Ian has correctly noted that the challenge is dealing with self-driving or automated vehicles, the idea of preventing such vehicles being used as vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, to think through that is to think, okay, well then we're thinking about controls on explosives. We're thinking about controls on the precursors to make explosives. So it's adding layers to the level of difficulty for nefarious actors to achieve their objectives. It's not solely about the vehicle itself or automation in the vehicle. It's equally thinking through the back-end issues here in terms of, well, if you want to make a car bomb, you need both a car and you need both a bomb. And that gives you 2 points of entry where you can build in obstacles. And so it's one of the challenges here will be thinking a little bit more holistically, not just being drawn into the automation aspects, although that is still, as you noted, an important aspect.
Comment?
I can offer a quick comment. I think that with these technologies, with any technologies, as was already mentioned, these technologies can be used for good and bad. This is the kind of cliche that we say. When it comes to protecting against driverless cars as bombs, I think we have the very same issues, mostly the same issues that we would have protecting against human driver cars with bombs in it. I'm not sure that the driverless, and I have been asked this question before, I'm not sure that the driverless aspect gives us any particular reason to worry about the bomb situation. Unless we believe that there's a high probability that somebody's waiting to use these technologies. I think in the autonomous car perspective or context, we have to weigh the many benefits or proposed benefits of that technology against the relative likelihood of something like a driverless car being used as a bomb. And we have other examples already. People made similar comments about, or raised similar concerns over small toy drones. And now, what's the number in Canada? 20,000? 200,000. Okay, off by a factor of 10. So that is many opportunities to intentionally bring down aircraft, if one so desires. And I know that when these toys were getting more sophisticated and being brought onto the market, these concerns were raised about aviation safety as well. And so I guess my point is just that, when we wander into when we decide to release these technologies into society, we make a decision that we're going to accept the risks that go along with it, and to a certain extent, we end up relying on the good of humanity, as we have been in the case of drones, and luckily, we have not seen any of these kinds of events, and I don't know that there's particular concern.
Well, of course, you remove the issue of recruitment of a volunteer to a suicide bomber when you use a driverless car, because that factor is probably a hurdle that is not that easily overcome, and this presents an opportunity for that. One of the things I didn't hear anyone mention was the positive military applications of the use of robots and drones in particular. I just spent last week aboard HMCS Ville de Quebec in the Atlantic Ocean, and we talked to the crew and to the leadership about the use of drones from a search and rescue point of view, allowing them to reach out further into the sea while they're doing their own work and expanding their broadening their eyes on the ocean. And I think that this is an emphasis that we haven't concentrated on, because it's the use of drones in particular are a huge benefit to search and rescue, to the military in terms of reconnaissance, and also as the Deputy Chairman of the Agriculture Committee, it's a huge benefit in agriculture, and there's all kinds of benefits here, but the military side it's difficult for us to think that this is a really good thing. But then there's the bad side of this thing of, for example, the driverless car packed with the explosives. That's more a statement than a question, but it's...
Senator, I reinforce that. I had an opportunity to speak a little bit about it. The slide's still up, but we actually flew for the Royal Canadian Navy in the Indian Ocean as part of NATO Task Force 150. And that's exactly what we did. We helped protect our troops and our in this case, the sailors, by going out and being able to identify dhows that were smuggling drugs or threat vehicles. And then during the day, they deployed the Sea King, and the ship would come out alongside. So in 2014, we helped the Royal Canadian Navy take down over $2 billion worth of drugs. That's a pretty good metric for the success of drones at sea. Yeah. Well, I live it. So thank you, Senator. That's exactly, I'm fully supportive of what you're saying.
Yes, thanks. I often feel like when I'm the ethicist in the room, people are expecting me to slap their wrists or something like that. And certainly, when it comes to drones, drones are, there are a lot of great, wonderful things that drones can do. I think it's a technology that's very promising. And I certainly would just, reiterate that the lethal autonomous weapons debate, at least the way it's been expressed in when I've seen it made at the international level, the issue is not over drones. It's over drones with this one very specific feature built into them, and that's the ability to pull a trigger without any meaningful human oversight. That's really that's the concern that people have. So it's absolutely not a concern about today's drones that are flying missions all over the world. Those drones, by and large, are remotely operated by human controllers who are making decisions at various levels about targeting and firing on targets. So that's not the issue. So I certainly would just like to, if there was any confusion, clarify that in taking a position against, for those people who take positions against the use of lethal autonomous weapons, they're certainly not taking a position generally against the use of drones. It's just very specific design features that they're concerned about. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Senator Day.
I'm going to try to ask this question. I could use a little artificial intelligence right now, and I allow my body to repair itself. But my first thought, and I'd like you to comment on, is the importance of legal and social issues. But we can't deal with it all, and there are legal and social issues for military applications, and the more the United States uses these drones to take out people that they decide are not desirable, it starts to present some serious problems worldwide. So that's a military side, and then you started talking about some of the other social, commercial type applications. Where are we? The United Nations can't do all of this. We can't do it all in one big meeting. So where are we in relation to dealing with the legal and social applications to catch up with the commercial and military side of things?
Right. So I will speak not as a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. So in terms of the legal issues, I'll speak generally. But certainly, I would expect that if there were a lawyer here, they might want to clarify what I'm saying. So that's just the start to this statement. So from a legal perspective, my understanding of the situation is that there is still some question, of course, and this is just the way the law works. There's still some question as to whether or not lethal autonomous weapons would be able to meet the requirements of international humanitarian law. So that's an open question. Some people argue that they will be able to for various reasons, and others are adamant that there's no way that they will be able to meet the requirements. And there are steps that militaries need to walk through in order to use under international humanitarian law in order to deploy or to use lethal force. So that's an open question. But there are arguments that people make that the legality isn't necessarily the issue when it comes to these lethal autonomous weapons. Again, the drones, there are legal questions over those, but we're using those. We have precedents. We have so we've seen those in use. We know roughly how those operate. But with these proposed or future military systems, the ones that would make the kill decision on their own, there are questions whether or not, even if you could satisfy your requirements under international humanitarian law, so the legal requirements, whether people make arguments that you would still have an ethical problem on your hands, that there's just something wrong about delegating that decision to a machine. So two different types of arguments, both concerned over the technology. Again, what I think, though, we need to do in order to decide whether or not so let's say Canada is working towards taking a position on the research and development of these lethal autonomous weapons. We need to understand what it is specifically that we are concerned about, if we're concerned about anything. Are we only concerned about the legal aspects, or are we, in addition to that, concerned about these other ethical issues, about that issue of delegating that decision to an algorithm or to an artificial intelligence? And if it turns out that it's the latter, then we have a very different kind of position than just the former, if it's just the legal concerns, because we may be able to solve those problems.
Anybody else on this? Professor?
Thank you. I think this isn't an issue where, unless an individual has already decided to take a position or is advocating for a ban on lethal autonomous weapons or is a proponent of lethal autonomous weapons, the vast majority of people who write on this or are having to think through this are working their way and trying to think through various different scenarios. Like, okay, well, in this example, what would happen? So, for example, one question that's evident in the literature is, well, autonomy for a machine to kill a human is widely considered, both in survey data, in polling data, by numbers like, okay, that's a step too far. There could be, various innate human objections to that appeal to us in the sense of machines killing humans. We're not going there. But machines killing machines in terms of autonomy, well, that's maybe a different kinds of question. You know, can we have an automatic static defense system that will maybe take down incoming missiles or incoming torpedoes or ship missiles, for example? And so my suspicion is that this debate will have to evolve over a period of time where we might end up with some sort of, you know, higher order ideas about we're not going to sanction or adopt a position where we advocate machines can kill humans. But we will have to think about that in reality over the next few years as it evolves, as the technology itself evolves, as conflict situations evolve. And so there's going to be a dynamic aspect to this that will probably be founded on some core principles and beliefs that countries will adopt or that civil society will push. But we're unlikely to be able to draw a bright, shining line, for want of a better way to think about this, at this point in time, because many of us really don't yet know how this will evolve.
I guess the message I'm taking from that is that we better stay in touch with one another, because we have a role as policy developers and developers of legislation, as lawmakers. But we need the input from people like you as to where this is going and what are you seeing as problems. I wonder if I could ask one other short question.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll try to. And this should involve Mr. Glenn and our favorite school of the Royal Military College. Your comments and your history, actually, going from the military into the civilian side of things, led me to reflect on how a lot of technological advancement has come from the military, from DARPA, I think, in the United States, and the race to the moon. You remember back a generation ago, and so much civilian ideas spun off from the government military involvement. But today, the lines seem to be getting a little blurred here as to where the advances are with respect to artificial intelligence. And I wonder if you could just comment as to where are we, military, government versus civilian development?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Senator. This is where I live, is trying to understand where that is. And I've lived my life in that moving technology from the military sphere to the commercial world. And we've seen it, and Canada's led a lot of this, right? In aviation, we went from pioneers in aviation flying in World War II, and then the bush pilots, and our whole Canadian aviation was based on guys who learned to do stuff in war. So we've seen it, everything from penicillin, radios, GPS, and now drones in my case. So it's not clear. I would say that the thing that has fundamentally changed are the drivers on the commercial side that have changed. So we live in a world where Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon are driving a technological change. I heard today that Apple has more money than God, effectively. They do. They have amazing capital. They can do whatever they want. We contrast that with our own defense. We don't spend money effectively. We have very little to spend. Some of it goes to Jersey. So we're not in the game. As a nation, we're trying. We have innovation was mentioned 300, 400 times in the latest budget. Lovely. We're not leading. It's being driven by commercial interests. The U.S., whole other story. China, a whole other story. Here's an interesting fact. Saudi Arabia, instead of buying a Predator, has bought a Chinese equivalent. And that Chinese company is building a factory in Saudi Arabia to do that, right? The world has changed a lot. And so the military part, it's a great crucible. And from that comes great technology. But in autonomy, artificial intelligence, that's being driven by global, commercial, scalable dollars that aren't currently, other than the U.S., maybe China and Russia, but the money isn't being spent. So I think that it's really being driven in those arenas, and that's a fascinating thing. But it also moves it from state to corporation, multinational corporations who no state has control over. The reason Apple has so much money is they just put their money someplace in a tax haven, and they can't be taxed. Well, let alone control whether they're developing a new artificial intelligence, an HAL 9000, right? So it's a really challenging world we live in, but it is absolutely, in my opinion, the technology now driven through where someone sees the innovation in the commercial side, and the military then tries to catch up on that.
Thanks very much.
Let me inject a question here. We've had unmanned aerial vehicles, drones used for surveillance, used for weaponry delivery systems for some time now. These are technologies that help ensure that lives are saved, and better to have a drone surveilling than to risk somebody going out in a plane. We understand all of that. And, you know, further technology like exoskeletons perhaps have some advantage. And you might want to describe what you think those are for those people that may not be aware of it. But the real crux of this thing gets into how far we go with lethal autonomous weapons or killer robots. I think Professor Littlewood, you just said, well, we could have a machine making a decision based on a missile to hit a missile. But where do we draw the line there? Do we say, no, you cannot have a machine making a decision to hit a human? At one point, do we see giving up some of that human control? Because I think that's the big issue, human control of all of this. Maybe you could comment on what countries you see going this further step of letting the machines make decisions, and should we allow that, and where should Canada be going on these advances in artificial intelligence and lethal autonomous weapons? Big question, but we'll start with Professor Littlewood.
Thank you, Senator. I should perhaps clarify, I'm not actually personally comfortable with the idea of machines killing machines in the sense of taking a human out of the decision-making loop. But I can see how that might be, if nothing else, useful for a way to explore an issue, and that's certainly what's happening in portions of the literature. My understanding at this stage of the evolution and thinking of issues is that certainly most Western democratic states are not advocating or necessarily anticipating a future free-for-all in the next few years where humans will be removed from decision-making issues. And I think that will always be problematic. Any move down that road will always be problematic for Western democratic states in terms of the way that we fully intend to adhere to international law, laws of armed conflicts, etc. So in terms of where other countries are going, I don't know in terms of specifics, but this idea of one of my concerns about the prohibition ban route for lethal autonomous weapons is the risk of ending up with something that sounds nice to us but won't work in practice. And I think that's potentially a very risky route to go. And it's equally a recognition of saying that international arms control agreements, countries choose to join them. And they are perfectly within their rights to choose not to be bound by them. So unless over time and through state practice, customary international law evolves, a country could reject any decision or choose not to join a treaty and decide that, no, it will move down the road of lethal autonomy. So we could end up with a kind of a variegated approach, which I suspect is one of the reasons why a number of Western states are moving quite slowly on this in an attempt that it might be better to have something in a few years' time where you have more key partners involved and accept it, as opposed to moving on something quickly where you get rejectionists who then find it hard to come inside at a certain point in time. Balancing that in terms of correct in terms of the timescale involved here, whatever the level of decision is in terms of a ban or limitations on deployment and use, etc., is of course always difficult in an arms control environment.
I'll jump in. The one thing I'm waiting to hear when I read about proponents making the case for the need for a lethal autonomous weapon system, I'm waiting to hear for that description of the use case that distinguishes the lethal autonomous weapon from the remotely operated weapon system, the kind of thing that we see today. You'll hear these what seem like relatively obscure when I'm hearing these descriptions of why we need lethal autonomous weapons. They seem to be obscure use cases. It's not about saving troops, because we can do that, it seems, with remotely operated weapons. It's not about being able to do the good humanitarian work or anything like this. I mean, we can do all that, it seems, with the current technologies or more advanced versions of remotely operated weapon systems. So the challenge that I would put to proponents is to come up with the use case that really tips the scales in favor of the need for that lethal aspect of the autonomy. Because if what we see is starting to look like consistent rejection of the technology from people, so from citizens, from soldiers even, when these surveys are run on military personnel, ex-military, current military personnel, they're uncomfortable with the idea of that one specific design feature. So I'm waiting to see what the argument for would be that really demonstrates a use case that we could not do without, and that it has to be that lethal autonomous weapon system. And I haven't seen that yet, so I'm waiting. If an argument like that exists, great, but I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
Sorry, I agree. I equally have not seen a compelling argument, but I'd suggest that it's incumbent upon all of us to actually sit down over days, weeks, coming back, rethinking things, to think through the various possible scenarios or examples. Like, okay, well, in this example, would there be a compelling case for it? In that example, no, there wouldn't be a compelling case. It's hard to think, though, in terms of a compelling case, in terms of we definitely need this, because we've managed and we've dealt with casualties and deaths and crises without them beforehand. So in a sense of what are they bringing to the table? But rather than wait for proponents of lethal autonomy to come forward and say, hey, this is the case, and then those of us opposed to it will, oh, no, it's not. It's actually incumbent upon those of us who would be supportive of or want to hone a good quality potential ban agreement to think through those range of uncomfortable scenarios where, okay, in this case, it actually we might have to think about that, or we might have to envisage that scenario. Okay.
I have a dimension. I'm a simple engineer, so I try to reduce things down to things that I understand. And so when I think about killer robots, and then I think about smart landmines, the only difference between those two things is mobility. So really, the decision to strike or not strike, the mine does that, right? A smart mine is a little bit more discriminating, right? It may not go off when a child works on it, but it takes an adult, or there might be something, some level of smartness to that. For a killer robot, it's got rules of engagement, and it's going to strike, right? So it just happens to be a mobile actor. So I'm not, again, fairly simple at this. So is there a role, the way we thought through our position on landmines is there an equivalent thought process that associates with autonomous robots, killer robots? And the second part is there a technological piece to this? The way we employed unmanned strike capability in Afghanistan was we had an amazing set of rules of engagement. So it required the commander and the lawyer to both agree that this was something that we could act on, right? I mentioned it earlier in a previous discussion. Do we have the ability to deterministically decide, hard code into the robot, those rules of engagement that we're comfortable with? I think technologically we may have that ability. And does that change the argument any? There's two questions that I'm not really giving any answers. I've just got some questions.
We're going to have a couple of people from Minds Action Canada speaking in a few moments. And
Senator Munson, perhaps, before we go to the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, as opposed to machines killing machines, how about machines helping machines? When I was here earlier, and I hate to get away from all this lethal military application business, but I'd like to look at the humanitarian side of robotics. And Mr. Littlewood earlier mentioned, I don't know if anybody talked about this, in terms of keeping things simple, you use the words humanitarian and disaster relief, and Canada has had a place in the world of being there for humanitarian and disaster relief. And in terms of robotics, I'd like to know what is, and artificial intelligence, what is happening now and what could happen in the future, and how could governments apply robotics and artificial intelligence in these kinds of fields?
Professor Littlewood?
The simple answer is I don't know. I'm one of those scholars who worries about the nefarious uses of technology as opposed to the positive and overwhelmingly positive uses. So where Canada is now in terms of thinking about AI, robotics and other issues and its uses in peacekeeping, humanitarian disaster relief, I simply don't know the details of that, Senator, I'm afraid.
Does somebody know?
Mr. Glenn?
I can talk for far too long on this, so I won't. But this is a key role for robots that fly. We had a job, this is a very Canadian job, looking for moose footprints in the snow in northern Ontario. 10 kilometer by 2.5 kilometer box. We imaged that at 2 centimeter resolution. So drop your phone, you'd find it in the woods. You had to find the footprints of the moose. We found moose as well. This ability in 5 hours to map 25 square kilometers at 2 centimeter resolution. Think of a disaster, any disaster. The West Coast, we have an earthquake. Up in Whitehorse, there's an earthquake. You've got destruction. You've got a number of issues. You send the robot up. You've got persistence, and you rapidly map. And now you know exactly where to send your aid, right? And then when you're deploying aid, you have this ability to provide communications and further assist whatever teams we're deploying in there. So first we get communications in there. We know exactly what's going on. That's a role that we can do today. Now, Canada doesn't do that necessarily with its DART or some of the things. It hasn't thought that process through, but other parts of the world, absolutely what's going on. On the picture of the upper right-hand corner there, we have a helicopter that's flying for the UN, and that is part of their UN MONUSCO mission, where they're mapping as part of some of the refugee issues that they have. So there's a huge role for real-time, great, much better data we can get from satellites. Yeah.
So just supplementary, you're all from the academic community. Well, two of you are. You're a businessman. Okay, well, that's fine. But have applications, what is happening within the academic world? Is there enough emphasis in terms of research and development going on in this country with those innovative young people in the country who seem to be, from my perspective, being left behind in some of the money that is out there to apply both from an academic level and both on an individual startup company level? And there seems to be an incredible emphasis towards the big people involved. And I'm hearing feedback from a lot of young people that there's so many wonderful ideas in terms of robotics and other issues, and where can we go and within the academic community and as a country in further developing these kinds of new intelligence?
So, I mean, if you ask academics, they'll always tell you that more money is welcome, right? And it's true. So in this area, I think my Twitter feed lit up when the announcement was made earlier this year that money was going to go specifically to robotics and artificial intelligence research. That was a very welcome move, because for several years now we've seen other countries moving on these issues, putting a lot of money and emphasis into robotics and artificial intelligence, and we were waiting for Canada to respond. So, the more money, the better. But obviously, when you have to balance things out, some money is good. We see money coming in now, and I think that it's a smart move. I think it will help to establish some of those labs and some of those groups at various universities that are looking to build out their capabilities in all areas, not just technological, but also the governance issues. Because my area is mostly with autonomous driving, and I know that the policy issues that need to be dealt with in order to deploy the technologies once we have them they're significant as well. I know we've seen that with drones as well. I'm sure you've dealt with the ongoing efforts to find ways within the law to fly your drones all over the place, and it's challenging, but it's work that's sorely needed. Yeah.
21 years of it.
21 years. There you go.
Okay, Senator Joyal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not because I'm vicious, but I would like to come back on the law issue aspect of it, or the legal aspect of it. I think that Canada has played a meaningful role in the past in relation to international initiatives that were not very popular by the superpower, i.e. the International Court, the Penal, International Court of Justice. Not all of them subscribe to it, but nobody would question that it has an impact. I.e. the landmine initiative was taken by Canada. Not all the country, of course, subscribe to it. We know who are and for which reasons. The same with initiatives that were taken in the control of the nuclear armament. We cannot prevent people from using it, but at least there is an international commission that oversees the existence and the use of those aspects that are very lethal. It seems to me that Canada should take the initiative as much as it pour money into artificial intelligence, and I was applauding it to it myself. I think that Canada has a role to play internationally to initiate the debate at UN, leading to and aiming at proposing an international treaty. Of course, China will not sign, Russia will not sign, Israel might not sign, South Korea or United Kingdom, the main proponent of the technology. But it will have an impact internationally on setting guidelines. And I think it is an initiative that the country was positioned to do that. And by just, sitting on the sideline and thinking that someday somebody somewhere will be good enough to take an initiative is dreaming in color. Because the money that is poured there by the private sector, as you well illustrated in your comment, is so big that we are, overtaken by it. I mean, what happened in the military is what will happen in the private sector. Jobs will be abolished that today are occupied by, quote, manpower that in years to come will be only robotic. So the challenges of that new technology is there, and I don't think we can sit idle and say, oh, somebody somewhere, will establish rules, but meanwhile, let's things go the way they are now. I think the strength of the economic movement behind this is so much so that the state have to intervene to try to, establish at least guidelines publicly and have countries around the world to rally to it. That's the way I see it. Otherwise, it's going to be the jungle at a point in time. The superpower will be the one that will be dictating the rules.
Who would like to respond? Professor Littlewood?
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. I think it's important to emphasize that efforts are being undertaken in this area. That, in fact, the establishment of the group of governmental experts decided in December of last year to deal with lethal autonomous weapons under the certain conventional weapons sort of framework agreements is occurring, and Canada has made statements. Canada has been involved, as has the US and others. The CCW, certain conventional weapons, the CCW agreement, as it's known, is renowned for being, in some harsh judgments, a place where good ideas go to die slowly, or a place where things move very, very slowly, and only occasionally in the right direction. And its frustrations with CCW, which in part gave rise to the sort of mine ban treaty and cluster munitions. So I don't want to. I would want to characterize the ongoing discussion as Canada is involved, but Canada's state-level, government-level considerations here has to take into account many different views. There are the legitimate views from civil society, from ethics, from arms control proponents who are like, let's just ban this, let's do it before they proliferate. And there's a certain level of attraction to that. But we equally have to think through, well, hold on a second, when we get involved in hostile combat operations, we are always abroad with our coalition partners. And being able to work with them efficiently and effectively is essential to our own contribution to such missions, as well as our own sort of safety and security itself. And so there are, I'm not supporting current government or past government positions per se. What I'm trying to suggest is the government has an unfortunate reality of having to juggle many, many different things and think through a future which, in fairness, none of us know what it's going to look like in the next 5 years in this area. But there are issues going, there is an international initiative here, and efforts underway. I'm not going to make a personal judgment on whether I think that is moving fast enough, moving too slow, because I think it's important to hear many different kinds of views on that at this point in time.
I mean, for the most part, I agree. I think that you see, with I guess one difference. So I'll say that, as I said in my statement, that I think I would agree with you more, Senator, that it's time to make some statement, even if it's sufficiently vague to cover some future probabilities. A statement is in some direction is better than no statement, and I think that if where other countries are making those statements, superpowers and others, we should add ours to the pile and at least have something to put on that pile. So, that's my focus is on motivating, insofar as I can, movement towards a statement, a policy position, right? So the work that we're doing is hopefully going to contribute in some small way to that.
Okay, that's it. Okay, I'm going to go to the floor. Now I have, three comments from the floor, up to 3 minutes each, please. First of all, Paul Mannon, Mines Action Canada.
Good morning, and thank you for giving me a chance to speak, and thank you for holding this. I think this is really an essential thing that needs to be happening in Parliament, and I'm glad that the Senate Independent Liberals have decided to have this open caucus. I work with Mines Action Canada. I'm an executive director, and we are a co-founder of the campaign to stop killer robots. And I want to say from the start, just to be clear, the campaign is not opposed to the use of robots in military, nor is it opposed to autonomy in military. but we do feel there is a line that should never be crossed. And what that line is, what the debate should be. Our colleagues in the UK have come up with the concept of meaningful human control as a way of discussing this internationally and nationally, what it is we're talking about, what it is we're not talking about, how much autonomy are we willing to accept, and how much autonomy are we not willing to accept. And that's a very valuable thing. I think, secondly, I want to say that these discussions are also going on in the human rights community, because this is an issue that pertains to policing, border control, crowd control. So we have two parallel discussions, and again, nationally and internationally on these issues, but it's basically the same technology. So when we do this, we need to make sure that we are talking about the same thing, and we don't end up in one stream saying these weapons are perfectly fine, and another one saying they're totally unacceptable. Just so you know, in the disarmament or arms control world, they are called lethal autonomous weapon systems, which I don't like, laws for short, because I want to ban them, so I don't want to ban laws. I want to actually ban autonomous weapons. In the human rights community, they're called lethal autonomous robotic systems, so just so you know. And as an example, before I started doing this work, which I've been working on for 20 years, I was in the humanitarian aid community. And I can see tremendous potential for humanitarian uses of robotics. Aid delivery would be a prime example, but also in my current work, I can see robotics being extremely helpful in explosive ordnance disposal, for example. So we're not opposed to that. We're just trying to get to the point where we think we should never go. And that is really basically the kill function. Who makes that decision? Who makes the decision to target? Who makes the decision to fire? I do want to pick up on a couple of things that people have said. I do think it's essential that Canada gets a national position, and I think we are well positioned to do that. We have some of the best scientists. We have renowned artificial intelligence experts in this country. We have fabulous engineers. We have commercial companies that are doing great work in robotics, and we have terrific academics and a lot of NGOs who are interested in this. So I think if we have a full an open, comprehensive national discussion, then we will come up with the best national position in the world. And there really aren't any governments in the world that have a national position yet. There are two governments that have said internationally they think it's premature to talk about a ban, and there are 19 that have said there should be a ban. Everybody else is in between. And I've not heard any government, I've been going to Geneva and UN for years on this now, not heard one military person or one government say we have to have these weapons. They're holding their cards close to their chest and they're not quite sure. And they want to see where the discussion goes. In Canada, our organization is calling for a good debate, an interdepartmental discussion in the government. We need global affairs there, we need national defense there, we need public safety there, we need science and innovation there. I would also suggest we need Development Canada there as well, to talk about all the aspects of this so we really understand what we're talking about. And then we can lead, as we did in landmines, and I think that's really important. Two lessons from the landmines. The Ottawa Treaty, this is the 20th anniversary of the Ottawa Treaty, just to remind you of that. One is, if Canada leads, the world will follow. We always get in this Canadian thing of, well, you know, we're too small, or we're not powerful enough, or we don't have a great economy, or whatever. If we lead, governments will follow. 80% of the world has followed us in banning landmines, and the rest of the world, with possibly the exception of North Korea, believes in what we did on banning landmines. I think the second thing on landmines is, the lesson learned is, don't wait until you have a global crisis before you want to do something. That's the reason why we want to have a preemptive ban. Let's not wait until we have a problem, because that gets us into the costly efforts of trying to ban after the weapon's been deployed. And that gets into really the complicated stuff that Jez Littlewood was talking about with chemical weapons and biological weapons, which we totally agree with. So if we do a preemptive ban, we will save lives, we will save destruction and chaos, but we'll also save national treasure as well, because we won't be spending as much money. It is doable. And then just one, since I do work on landmines a lot, I just want to clarify, smart mines are actually mines that are supposed to deactivate or deneutralize within a set period of time. They cannot tell the difference between a civilian or a child or a soldier or a combatant. So the reason both landmines and cluster munitions, which both have been argued to have those smart features, are banned is that those features don't actually work. So that's why we ban them. But we can learn a lot of other lessons from landmines. And thank you. I probably used up more than 3 minutes, and I apologize for that.
Oh, very, very valuable comment. Thank you very much, Mr. Mann. And also, Aaron Hunt, is it, from same organization?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I guess I'm very pleased to be here this morning and adding a little extra gender balance to Madam Senator this morning. As Paul mentioned, Mines Action Canada is a co-founder of the campaign to stop killer robots. So I just had a few things I'd like to sort of respond to from this morning's conversation, which I think was very interesting. And I'm really sorry for the translators. I'm going to talk really fast to keep under my 3 minutes. So on the dual use issue, I'd just like to highlight the fact that there is no dual use for a kill function. You have dual uses for so many robotics aspects of military hardware, but not for the kill function itself. For example, one of our colleagues that works on robotics always explained it to me like, we can have a armed ground robot who patrols perimeters, whether it's a border or a perimeter around a military institution. Accidentally turned off my mic, sorry about that. Trying to keep my notes in place. Yeah, so you have the armed robot patrolling. It's reporting back to someone who's in charge inside the base, somewhere safe. It can send data, it can move, it can choose directions, there's dual uses for all of these things. What there is not a dual use for is if the robot itself chooses to fire on something. There's even dual uses for the technology that we currently have where a person would make the decision to fire. That makes sense to everybody? Not a military roboticist, so hopefully I explained that decently. So we can talk about dual-use technology all we want, but the campaign is concerned about the decision to fire, and there is no dual use for that. Just to add to the conversation on IHL and autonomous weapons, we didn't bring any lawyers from the campaign this morning. We do have many of them. I'd encourage you to have a look at Human Rights Watch and Harvard Law School's publications on the topic. They've done excellent legal analysis of autonomous weapon systems. But the concerns that come up legally are with both proportionality, distinction, and accountability. So for anyone who's not familiar with IHL in the room, proportionality means making sure that any civilian damage is proportional to military advantage gained. The distinction is be able to determine who is a civilian or someone who is hors de combat and someone who's still participating in the combat. And accountability is if something goes wrong, we know whose decision it is and who would be held accountable. And as Mr. Glenn highlighted, Canadian military personnel and most military personnel are highly trained to be able to make these very difficult decisions. And the campaign's position is that AI and autonomy won't be able to make those decisions properly to a legal standard. And we were talking about public opinion on and the importance of that. That's actually a legal requirement or a legal concept that we need to keep an eye on, called the Martin's Clause. Not going to read the whole thing because it came from 1907, but anyone cool on IHL, check out Hague Law. 1907 is probably the most recent version. Senator Munson, your questions about money. Everyone loves to talk about money. Campaign would love some money, by the way. But a preemptive ban would actually help funnel money towards useful and helpful robotics, the kind of dual-use technology that will help society and the military as well. And I think one thing that's very interesting is ClearPath Robotics, a company out of Waterloo, is the first company in the world to say that they will work on robotics. Their job is to create robots to do dangerous and dirty work for humans, and they have military contracts, but they've pledged to not build autonomous weapon systems. And that company is actually a startup run by a bunch of mostly guys my age. So good point there. Senator Joyal, your comments on Canada's leadership were perfect. Can we write those down and send them around as advocacy points?
Minister, I think
that would be lovely. And then, Professor Littlewood, I just have a couple questions about why do you think that those deeper conversations that you keep saying need to happen, why do you think they're not currently happening? Because I see those happen at within the campaign ourselves, with the academics we work with, and with governments. And also, who do you think is not being included in the discussion on that should be? And hopefully I stuck under 3 minutes, but I'm going to go sit down even if I didn't.
Thank you. Let me ask if the panel has any response either to Mr. Mannon or Ms. Hunt's comments. Professor Littlewood.
I have to do the courtesy of responding to the question. I mean, it's not that I'm not of the view that people are being cut out of this discussion. The discussions in Geneva, the discussions among the sort of the coalition is relatively open. So I'm certainly not trying to give the impression that certain points are being closed down. My concern about this is, to use your example, Erin, in the sense of there isn't a dual use aspect in a kill function. It's like, okay, arguably correct. But then let's be clear, if we're going down the arms control international legal route, we are talking about limiting a piece of code or a specific function on a weapon or a platform. That is not amenable to counting and categorizing and inspecting and dealing with physical, tangible things, because your function is not a tangible aspect. Your function is a decision-making. It's embedded either in the code or it is in, if you are deciding the function is there or the function is not, it's a decision that is already, in one sense, has a human aspect. So one of the concerns that I have, or why I'm wary about embracing this in its entirety, is it would be fairly easy, and it's probably been done in fairness, it would be fairly easy to come up with something equivalent to the blinding lasers or the 1925 Geneva Protocol. Thou shalt not employ lethal autonomous weapons. A lethal autonomous weapon is defined as, in the blinding laser context. But we're not getting an international organization to administer that unless you can define precisely what you are identifying, and that states will then declare we have X of that and Y of not, and the rest of it is off limits. And if we think through the situation in the future of there is an allegation that a lethal autonomous weapon has been used to kill humans, then to think through, okay, what does that mean to deal with that allegation? There has to be somebody who can go on the ground and look at the evidence. That evidence is likely to involve munitions, but it's going to require equally experts on understanding how the machine was coded, the control issues. It's all possible to develop that, but it's incredibly complicated. And so I'm wary about this issue, or the fully embracing we should go for a ban treaty, because in fairness to NGOs and coalitions of NGOs, who I'm broadly sympathetic to and supportive of, you are advocating. You have a narrative here and you are advocating for a ban. That's your job, I'm sympathetic to it. It's not that simple. You have to think about how this is going to work. If we are going to draw a line in international law that says, thou shalt not use lethal autonomous weapons, great, let's do that. But let's equally accept that there are limits to it, because we will be heavily reliant on every single actor who has the potential to develop them not to cross that line. If you are then going to say, but we want to investigate allegations of use or non-compliance, as in country X, you are actually developing lethal autonomous weapons, you need a very complex, sophisticated back-end inspection mechanism that can do that. And it is credible and will be accepted by the state actors who will basically control either the territory where these are being used or developed. And I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that in a way that gives me a great deal of confidence. The line, the Geneva Protocol equivalent, yeah. The blinding lasers equivalent, probably. something akin to what people are talking about in traditional arms control, with an institution, with an investigation mechanism that can handle some really complex compliance issues. I don't think we're there yet, which is why I'm wary. It's not that I'm unsupportive, and I'm certainly not against, but I am wary.
Okay. Thank you. By the way, on the question of gender balance, we did invite some women to join the panel, but unfortunately only men accepted. But anyway, pardon?
Yeah, Senator.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the panel.
The panel.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay, overall, the table, yes, indeed. Okay, and one more from the floor, and it happens to be a member of Senator Day's staff, going to save his voice, I guess. Caitlin Grope is going to ask about aerial imaging.
I'm
Caitlin?
sure I'll be far less eloquent than Senator Day. But my question is mainly as a follow-up to Senator Munson's question, and it's for Mr. Glenn. It's more so on government applications of this technology. So one of my first jobs was as a aerial photography annotation assistant. So we initially started with large rolls of film, and then I saw us move over to digital. So my question largely, I know it's a relatively boutique or niche field in Canada, but you were talking about in natural disasters how we have much better data than we could acquire from satellites even. And a lot of the contracts we did were largely on fire mapping, provincial mapping of highways. We did mapping of a lot of northern communities. So the traditional method would be you send a pilot up with a camera operator in the back. We've discussed already the commercial applications for these technologies. So my question would be, when do you see us moving away from the human factor in that at all, considering it's a relatively benign industry?
Thank you. That's a great question. And the issue is not about the technology at all. Aerial photography space gives you 30-ish centimeter resolution. So square pixels like this. Sometimes they're this big, but some, depending, if you're really good on a nice day, you're going to get pixels like this. Where it makes sense is you can, with a robot, we can do, as I said, 2 centimeters. Where we did for Via Rail and the O-Train, we actually imaged some of their critical infrastructure, where we're down at 0.2 centimeters, so we can see the bolts for railroad crossings. We think of rail safety and all the security aspects of that. The issue really is ability to fly safely in the airspace, and Transport Canada, which has a constituency of 33,000 manned aircraft, still not catching up with the 200,000 unmanned aircraft. So it's a policy change that Canada has to make to enable drones to fly beyond visual line of sight. There's a technical solution called put transponders on everything, so we all tell each other where they are. And that will completely enable the industry. To give you a comparison cost, when we flew to look for moose footprints in the snow, we had to have a chase aircraft. I called it my big yellow chaperone. It was a 7-seat Airbus helicopter following us around. After 2.5 hours, we had to come back to land so they could go get a coffee and put 440 liters of fuel on to 2 for my little aircraft. So in Canada, we have these vast infrastructure. We've only mapped 40% of the north. We've got forest fires. We've got greenhouse gases we want to track for our pipelines. We have the technology to do it. We don't have the enabling policy from Transport Canada that says robots can fly safely with other air users. There's a way to do that. We haven't got that. When that happens, we will see as a nation an opportunity for us to lead the unmanned aviation piece as we once did for manned aviation. It is a bit of a soapbox for me, sorry.
I wanted to throw in a question. We've been talking about Canada taking a leadership role, developing policy on some of the issues that we've discussed. And I know, Professor Littlewood, that you indicated that what we needed at this point would be a set of guiding principles. What might be some of those guiding principles that should underlie the policy development if Canada is to go forward?
Thank you, Senator. I'm not sure I know, in all honesty, what I would list as a set of guiding principles, principally because on this issue I've sort of been following from the outside as opposed to sort of following inside. I mean, in one sense, both Erin and Paul have been far more active in Geneva, and the guiding principles would certainly have to involve input from civil society groups and concerned individuals. And as already indicated, you need around that table DND, foreign affairs, public safety. Basically, we're getting close to probably every sort of government department, as well as representatives who are thinking, okay, what are the industrial applications of this? How will any guiding principles affect research? I mean, the fundamental guiding principle is relatively easy, and it's adherence to existing international law concerning law of armed conflict. I mean, that's really not in question here. So those questions that Erin articulated about sort of proportionality, ability to do discrimination, certainly not causing excessive harm. I think government of Canada knows that. I think probably internally many people are already well on board with that. But moving beyond guiding principles, it's then thinking through, okay, how do we then operationalize this if we get a treaty or if we get an agreement? And that operationalization is difficult. And that's a significant portion of my wariness here. I don't think we have been able to consider all the aspects of operationalizing an agreement unless our agreement is literally drawing a line and we are accepting, we hope everybody adheres to it.
I would, so guiding principles can be tough. So what we've opted to do with the research funding that we received from DRDC is hold this meeting in the fall to bring together actually many of the stakeholders that you're describing. Not a full set, but you do what you can with the money that you're given. We will have representatives from various agencies, and we decided to focus on this issue of meaningful human control. So people are talking about it. What does that mean? How would that translate into various policy options? What can we do with that? So it's a start, and I would just say that. Although guiding principles could be something of a kind of grander goal, it's even the smaller steps to try to understand what people are talking about, what they might mean by these terms that they're coalescing around at the international level would be very helpful in starting towards articulating those policy positions. So there's hope.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more person from the floor, and then we'll wrap up. Andrew Phillips, who's from the office of MP Francis Drovan. It's on.
So that's Francis Drouin is my MP I work for. Glengarry Prescott Russell is the writing. So my question is, given the possibility that autonomous weapons are inevitable, and it's something that will happen within the next 10 years, 5 years, who is going to be responsible for preparing a contingency plan or some kind of defense against these weapons? Is it going to start with the public sector, or is it going to start with the private sector? So my question is to the guests as well as the senators. So that's something I'm concerned about, and I think we should err on the side of caution when it comes to something that could be potentially deadly. So that's what's going through my head right now, listening to this whole Open Caucus. And just any quick comments would be appreciated. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you for the question. I'll jump in by saying that I really don't believe that these technologies are inevitable. So I think that we have a window of opportunity where we see development going on internationally in technologies that could enable lethal autonomous weapons. But we, as Paul mentioned, we do see hesitation at the international level. Governments are not claiming that they're excited about lethal autonomous weapons and pursuing them wholeheartedly. That's not the case. So I think we have an opportunity to have the discussion. As with other technologies, I mean, if we take a decision, not to pursue them, yes, other state actors may pursue them, but that doesn't negate the value of taking a position that says that you are not going to pursue that technology. So I don't see it as inevitable. I don't. Yeah.
Any other comments or wrap-up comments as we're coming to the end of the meeting? Panelists? Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, listen, I think we're far better informed now than we were before we started this meeting in terms of this whole issue and what are some possibilities. I think Senator Joyelle has given us some good ideas about the path ahead. And we've explored this issue with some excellent panelists, and I thank you very much for being part of it.
Simply to say thank you once again to our panelists for very thoughtful presentations, and thank you for sharing your expertise and experience with us. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, and with that, I declare the meeting adjourned.